You are listening to the 10-Minute Off-Road Podcast, the podcast for the off-roader with a short attention span.
Episode 5. Oh, why did I get into this? Hello and welcome to the 10-Minute Off-Road Podcast. I'm your host, Nikki G. I'm here to talk about all things off-road for about the next 10 minutes or so. Why 10 minutes? Because that's about when the pizza gets here. This is the podcast by off-roaders, for off-roaders, about off-roading, I guess. This is the podcast where I hit the streets and talk to you, the off-roaders, and see what's on your mind. Unfortunately, COVID-19 is putting a damper on all that. I would like to apologize to the gentleman in the white JK in the Lowe's parking lot that I approached with my microphone to ask him a few questions, and he kind of freaked out, started yelling social distancing. So I apologize. Yeah, my bad. But someday this will be over and this podcast will get a lot better for it. So on this episode, a friend of mine, Frankie, gave me a good idea for a podcast. How did you get into off-roading? And because I really can't get out there in the streets and talk to you guys, I went to social media and posted a question. And a few people responded. So let's get to it. So Max says, we were looking for a hunting truck and then fell in love with a classic 4x4. And that was about 20 years ago. And yeah, that's how a lot of people just kind of stumble into this by accident. And then Frankie, the guy who sent me this idea, and he just recently purchased a 96 XJ, getting ready for the season. He said, I already had a love for the great outdoors, and when I moved to North Carolina, I was introduced to off-roading by a guy I know at work. After I took my first group trip to Uwharrie, the addiction for Jeep parts and off-roading started. Yeah, that's the downside to off-roading is the parts, or is it the upside? I like the modding of it. I hate the mandatory maintenance as last episode, but anyhow. And then Nate from SWB Crawler said, honestly, my dad had an old Chevy pickup truck. He traded it for a newer pickup that was 4x4 when I was a teenager. We used to go hunting and fishing, and that's all it took to get me hooked. First vehicle I ever bought was a 4x4, and I've been off-roading ever since. And if you want to, Nate talks a lot about his roots in 4x4 on his YouTube channel, SWB Crawler, as well as his other social media outlets. So how I got started in off-roading, it all started with my brother. I'm a little brother, so I always follow Big Brother around. And my Big Brother he's always been a gearhead. And he's worked in the automotive industry his whole life as a mechanic and master auto body. But he used to drag race. I used to follow him around drag racing. And then when I was a kid, he bought a beat up Chevy Blazer, and we lovingly called the 3-door dumpster. And he started driving that through the fields and the woods. And so I kind of got hooked on it. And I used to follow him and his friends around in my Gremlin. And then I'd get stuck and they would kind of pull me out, and sometimes they would just leave me there stuck and I had to walk back. But that's a brother thing. And oddly enough, the AMC Gremlin with studded snow tires did surprisingly well off-road. I decided to interview my brother and find out how he got into off-roading. But it poses a problem. Those of you that know me know my brother, as we lovingly call the fuzz, is deaf. And so it doesn't make a good podcast, but I asked him some questions and he answered them, and I'm going to read them on the air. And I'll try not to use my goofy fuzz voice. Maybe just a little bit, because, well, he can't hear it, so he'll never know. Nobody better tell him. Hey, Fuzz, I'm doing a podcast about off-roading. I'd like to ask you a few questions. If you don't know what a podcast is, it's like a radio show. And if you don't know what a radio show is, it's just a bunch of people talking. Sure, I could answer a few questions, but don't call me Fuzz. My name is Tony. Use it. Sure thing, Fuzz. First question is, when we were kids, we used to drag race all the time. You were heavy into drag racing. Why did you make the switch to off-road? Well, drag racing was a lot of money for 13 seconds of fun. Or in your case, 24 seconds of fun. Ha ha ha. Yes, I used to drag race my Pinto. That's what he's referring to. Snot. That doesn't really answer the question how you got into it other than you're cheap. Well, what we did in Ohio really wasn't off-road. When I moved to Southern California, I really discovered what off-roading was. And it was a lot of fun, and I was hooked. And like I said, it's a lot cheaper. So you wheeled out west. Tell me your favorite places. I wheeled all over west of the Mississippi, and even in Mexico. I like to just head out of town, and mostly in the desert where there's a lot of open space. There's plenty of room for everybody. My next question is, you bash Moab quite a bit. Well, what's your beef with Moab? Now, Moab is a fun place to wheel. There's a lot of challenges. It can be mild, and it can be as easy or as wild as you want. The problem I have with it is it's just there's always people there. I go wheeling to get away from everybody. And I can agree with that. You've been repelling people, mostly of the female persuasion, for years. He doesn't know I said that. So what is it about the desert that you like so much? Well, it's mostly rocks and technical stuff with very little mud. I hate mud. I'm with you there. I'm not a fan of mud. For my final question, September 4th, 1981, you put the empty cereal box back in the cupboard and blamed it on me. Do you find it very difficult living with the guilt? Ha ha ha. Putting the empty cereal box back is your MO, not mine. It's a mystery that'll never be solved. All right, I'd like to give a shout out to my brother for being a sport and answering these questions. All right, so now it's time for the question of the month. And the question of the month is a hot dog a sandwich? And Nate answered it, said yes and no. So that doesn't really help, but my thought is it's in between two pieces of bread. It's a sandwich. It's a cylinder-shaped sandwich, but it's a sandwich nonetheless. All right, that's about all the time I have for today. Or that's all I could think about talking about. I'm yet to hit the 10-minute mark on this. So if you got a comment about today's show, you want to share how you got into off-roading, just shoot me an email, 10minuteoffroad@gmail.com. And if you have any ideas for future shows or any comments or just want to share anything, I'm desperate for content. I'll put anything on the air. You can also catch me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all that other social media crap, except Snapchat. I don't even know what the heck Snapchat is. I guess I need to get a 12-year-old kid in here as a social media director. All right, I'd like to give a quick shout out to everybody that interacted with me on Facebook. I appreciate the content. Brian at Route 16 to Grind, his podcast about off-roading, outdoors, hunting, fishing. He's been very supportive. And the folks over at the Jeep Talk Show, Tony, Josh, Tammy, and Wendy, very supportive. I mean, very helpful. And they have this crazy guy that calls in there once a week. I guess I need to get a phone number so I can get him to call in and leave me a voicemail. Because I think that's what really makes their show so special and big. It probably wouldn't go anywhere if it wasn't for that guy calling in all the time. All right, so thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate the listens and the comments and all the support and love from you guys. And so this is Nikki G signing out and saying, wheel what you got and be happy.
Follow the 10 Minute Off-Road Podcast on Twitter, the Gram, and YouTube.
And hey, we made the big time. You can now catch the 10 Minute Off-Road Podcast on iTunes and Google Play. Yeah, they accepted it. But not iHeartRadio, the bastards. I don't know what their deal is. Not good enough for them.